I think there's a beam here, a floor beam that goes across, so that's why it doesn't squeak. About 2 years ago, my 11-year-old granddaughter quit dance. This would be Dakota, whom you all know because she's been here. The long and the short of it is that she was exhausted. Playing basketball and volleyball, practicing both during the week, and having tournaments on the weekends, sometimes both on the same weekend, along with 3 dance classes a week required for competition, plus being in school, was more than her brain could handle. While none of us are 6th graders anymore, thank God, right? I'm sure we can all identify with having too much on our plates, being pulled in many directions, too many directions, and feeling drained and depleted. I imagine that this is how Peter and James and John were feeling when Jesus suggests to them in our gospel for today that they all hike up Mount Tabor. They have now been traveling with him for the better part of 3 years, mostly likely sleeping rough as they crisscrossed the Holy Land between Galilee in the north and Jerusalem in the south through Samaria, crossed over to the other side of the Sea of Galilee into Gentile territory and back, always on the move. Yes, life with Jesus was fast-paced and an adventure. He not only teaches, but heals, casts out demons, and preaches and asks them to do the same, sending them out ahead of him 2 by 2 by themselves to the towns and villages he had yet to visit. Jesus says, don't worry about anything. Just look at the lilies of the field. And all the while they're thinking in the back of their minds about that fishing business they left behind, anxious for whether their families are managing without them. After drawing a crowd of 5,000 out in the middle of nowhere until well past the dinner hour, Jesus gives them all heart palpitations as he says, you give them something to eat, before he multiplies the loaves and the fishes. And when the crowd is dispersed, Jesus asks them, and you, who do you say that I am? And when Peter replies, the Messiah of God, Jesus proceeds to tell them he must suffer and be killed, and that if they want to be his disciples, they must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow him. Talk about being pulled in too many directions. Talk about having too many loaves and fishes on your plate and feeling drained and depleted. Ironically, when Jesus suggests hiking up Mount Tabor, it probably sounds good to them because in those days, hiking up a mountain was one of the things people did to get a little R&R, like when we visit a state park in the fall to look at the colors. And the disciples had probably done this before with Jesus for this very reason, to get away. But Peter and James and John would be in for quite a surprise this night as they have a time stands still, socks knocked off experience of God in Jesus. It is as St. John writes in his prologue of the gospel, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. This must have all been something to behold, not only what they saw, but what they heard as that bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice spoke, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." If Jesus' baptism had been a personal religious experience, this was anything but that. If up until now the disciples had mainly seen Jesus as a miracle worker, a hero of the common man, and the hopeful Messiah of their nation, this was anything but that. And that R&R the disciples had hoped only in their dreams. But this was an experience of the divine, an epiphany, right out in the open for all to see. As is typical of all epiphanies, the moment passes and they find Jesus alone as he had been before. And as they come down from the mountain and go back to their regular lives, and by the way, Jesus says, don't tell anybody, a whole pack of people are waiting for Jesus to touch and heal them at the bottom. Our gospel cuts off before that part, but that's what comes next. And everything seems as it was before, except it isn't. You see, this transfiguration of Jesus is really a twofer. It is two epiphanies. Jesus is having his own experience as he finds himself talking with Moses and Elijah about what is ahead of him in Jerusalem, his death, and how this is to be a fulfillment of the law and the prophets, whom these two characters represent. And then there is Peter and James and John, who witnessed all of this and have their own experience, meant to fortify and strengthen them and eventually help them understand that God was in what happened to Jesus of Nazareth and the kind of Messiah really he was, and what is now to be expected of them as they take up their cross and follow. So, what about us? Too bad. We don't have these kinds of experiences to guide us in our own time, right? But we do. We do. What about that dream maybe we had once and have never been able to forget? What about that sermon that we thought was written just for us? What about that Easter vigil several years ago when we were all gathered here, when we weren't supposed to be gathered here because it was pandemic quarantine, and we decided if there was ever time to pray, it was now. And so we came anyway, and as Grace is reading the first lesson about creation, and she says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, the sun burst through the windows and lit up the church. Epiphany. We've likely all had these kinds of experiences. The countless small ways that God has of showing us just a glimpse of the divine presence, the Shekinah, when we need it most and least expected. And I suspect there's many more of those experiences than we recognize because we generally aren't brought up to expect them. And so they may be small kind of peripheral vision things that we miss. But when they do happen, do we not want to keep them forever? It's what Peter and James and John were trying to do when Peter dazedly suggests that they build 3 dwellings, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, so they could all camp out. We have those experiences. We want to keep them. We want them to come back to us. We want to be able to recreate them. But we cannot do that, except in our memory. Because as human beings, we are not programmed or built to be able to remain so intensely in the presence of the divine for very long. It would short out our circuits. It is like at the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they finally open the ark, and those who look away or cover their faces are the only ones who live. No one looks on the face of God and lives. Yet, even as our moments fade, we know something is up. We know we are invited to embrace a shift or a change. Because it is in these holy moments that God comes to let us know that God is close, that God comes to let us know he is with us in what lies ahead. Most of the time they come when something is going to change, and we're expected to change as well, or there's a challenge that we need to face. So on this last day of the Epiphany season, we contemplate Jesus' transfiguration as he then sets his sights for Jerusalem, and his death. And we think about our world, how things are not how they were when we were growing up, how the Christian moral compass of our country seems to have slipped away, and how this world seems to be more than ever ruled by the very powers of darkness that Jesus died to win victory over. As we head into Ash Wednesday later this week, I call all of us to the observance of a Holy Lent. Through self-examination and repentance, by prayer, fasting, and self-denial, and by reading and meditating on God's holy word, as it says in the prayer book, or by any other means to which we feel called, to take things off our plates, to sort out and choose the directions in which our lives are pulled, to open space and time for discernment about what it means to be a Christian in our time and what it means to follow the way Jesus leads, knowing that his transfigured presence goes before us always to show us the way. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy